Chapter 1. The Forgotten Morning. Waking to the floating world. The first thing Nalya noticed when she woke was the weight pressing against her ribs. A heavy, slow drag, as if the whole world had sagged lower in the night. Her chest ached with the familiar bruised feeling that followed a night of visions. Half-remembered dreams stitched with God-glow symbols and impossible skies. A dampness clung to her bones, thick and sluggish, heavier than it should have been, as if the city itself wanted to pull her back into sleep and keep her there forever. She lay still in her low-tethered hammock, swaying gently between two cracked gravity hooks in the slums of Port Levant, the poorest part of the floating city. Above her, mist coiled through the open beams of her family's half-collapsed home. The air smelled of rusted ropes and burnt salt. She cracked open one silver-flecked eye. Her limbs felt slow, as they always did after a night of visions. Half-dreams of places she had never seen, voices she could never hold on to. A raw tightness lingered in her muscles, a hollow ache behind her eyes. The ghost of a seizure that might have come and gone while she slept. Her nerves hummed with the faint electric aftertaste of it, leaving her body heavy and untrustworthy, her breath shallow as she forced herself to move. Through the broken window, she could glimpse the sky ribbons, twisting strands of purple god glow that ran through the upper levels of the city, far above where she lived. Up there, the platforms danced lightly on perfect currents. Down here, in the low-tethered slums, the air was heavier, sluggish, bitter. A shiver ran through her. Her hands trembled faintly as she swung herself out of the hammock, her weightless beads barely clinking against her braids. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, cold and sharp. Half fallen already, she tugged on her gravitic wrap, a patched, faded thing that barely held the charge needed to adjust her weight, and fastened it around her waist. Today was the day, her baptême du vent. Today, she would either climb into the sky where she belonged or fall forever. Her one chance to prove she wasn't broken. She tightened the wrap around her waist and made her way downstairs, the rickety steps groaning under her light tread. The heavy smell of old wine and sour breath hit her before she reached the bottom. Papa was already awake, or at least upright, slumped in the battered armchair by the hearth, a half-empty jug hanging from his fingertips. His eyes, once sharp as a skyfarer's, were dulled and glassy, drifting somewhere far beyond the walls of their broken home. The tattered insignia of a skyfarer, stitched onto his coat, had rotted into a rust-colored stain. "Morning, Papa," she said quietly. He grunted, not looking at her, tipping the jug to his lips with a clumsy hand. The wine spilled down his chin, staining the collar of his threadbare shirt. Nalya hovered a moment longer, her mouth opening as if to speak, some small, desperate thing she hadn't yet lost. But the words dried up in the heavy air. She swallowed the tight knot in her throat and stepped out into the slums, the door sagging closed behind her. Outside, the market was already alive. Merchants shouted hoarse bargains over the sound of hammering anvils and creaking tethers. Children darted between floating platforms, but they gave Nalya a wide berth. She ignored them. She was used to the stares, the whispers. Touched by bad god glow, they said. Vision drunk. Half mad. One day, she thought, they would regret this. One day they would see her rise higher than all of them, beyond the low-slung slums and their bitter mouths. She would leap so far, the sky itself would remember her name, and when she looked back, it would be as a ghost, untouchable, unbroken. She kept her head down and crouched by the old lead-fill ropes, tethering their house to the market platforms. One had slipped loose overnight. With shaking hands, she tried to tighten the knots, but her fingers seized halfway through, a tremor locking her joints. She hissed under her breath, blinking back the dizzy haze rising behind her eyes. Not today. Not when everything depended on making the jump. No one else down here would bother fixing the lead-fill ropes. They didn't care who fell. A loose platform, a snapped tether, just another mouth gone. One less burden. Only her lineage remembered the old ways, the true knots. The Skythreader's blood ran thin in her, maybe, but it ran true enough. Without her, half these shacks would have already drifted into the deep winds, lost forever. Nalya gritted her teeth and forced her hands to obey. The rope bit into her palms, rough and cold, burning her skin as she hauled the fraying cord tight. Each knot was a prayer, not to gods, not to luck, but to memory. To the hands of her grandmother, who had once woven the sky itself into bridges. To the stubborn fire smoldering in Nalya's chest, even when her body betrayed her. The knot cinched home with a final jerk. She sagged back, breathing hard, her vision swimming with black spots. Above her, the morning sky was a bruised purple, flecked with the first glints of trade barges drifting down from the upper tiers. The jump would happen soon. A shadow passed over her, not from a cloud, but a figure descending along the ropes, nimble, reckless. She knew the way he moved before she saw his face. Tavrek. He landed lightly on the platform beside her, boots scuffing against the boards. "You're wasting time," he said, voice low, urgent. "They're already gathering by the shard spire." Nalya stood slowly, wiping her hands on her threadbare tunic. Her fingers still trembled, but she curled them into fists. "I had to fix the ropes," she said. "Or do you want to fall through the sky today?" Tavrek gave a short, humorless laugh. His eyes flicked to the market crowds, wary. Fall, jump, makes no difference. Either way, they'll be happy to see us break our necks. Even though it wasn't much, the fact that Tavrek even spoke to her was a kind of respect. A small, rough thing, but it mattered. Others wouldn't dare show her even that. She followed his gaze. Already, a few heads had turned. Faces she recognized. Merchants who had barred her from their stalls. Neighbors who had crossed themselves when she passed. No one would mourn her if she fell. All the better. Nalya reached for the tattered pack slung by the door and slung it over her shoulder. Inside it, the relic pulsed, faint, invisible. But she felt it singing to her bones. Today, they would make the jump. Today she would tear herself free of the gutters and the gravity that had held her down. One leap, one chance. She looked up, past the sagging rooftops, past the curling smoke, thick with the scent of frying spiced fish and sweetstone, past the little shrines tucked into doorways where ran prayers to the river and sky gods burned in twisting plumes of incense. The music of the lower tiers drifted upward, drums, pipes, and the clatter of old rayon dances meant to honor the currents and the winds. Floating barges swayed overhead, draped in bright patchwork canopies stitched from scraps of 100 voyages, their sides painted with swirling ancestral sigils that told the stories of old rayon traders who had once mastered both sea and sky. Children wove between the crowds below, their faces daubed with bright rayon festival colors, chasing after sweetstone vendors singing the songs of far-off delta lands. Up there, above the laughter, above the lazy smoke, and the worn banners fluttering from leaning poles, the spires of the Skythreaders crowned the highest tier, where the god glow ran so rich it split the heavens into rivers of molten light, and the true currents whispered promises only the bold could hear. By midday, the initiates had gathered, shivering beneath the roiling sky. Clouds thickened like bruises above the grand ascendancy, the wind thrumming low and dangerous, with the first whispers of a gravity storm. Nalya stood apart from the others, a single fixed point against the chaos brewing overhead. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. She could feel the pull starting inside her head, the familiar tightness behind her eyes, the dull throb in her temples, the aching pressure of a vision clawing its way forward. Not now, she begged silently. She dug her nails into her palms, sharp and grounding, anchoring herself to the present, to the cracked stone beneath her boots, to the faint taste of lightning on the air. Stay here. Stay now. The baptême du vent was sacred, the final ritual before one could be called ascendant. It was not the place for visions. She lifted her gaze, forcing herself outward. Across the wide platform, the other initiates lined up like offerings, each one wrapped in ceremonial whites that fluttered madly in the rising gusts. All but one moved with practiced grace, iron and certainty forged into every breath. Lyrica. Swift, perfect Lyrica. The girl everyone had known would fly the highest would be chosen first. And yet, Nalya saw it before anyone else did. The way Lyrica's shoulders hunched inward, the tremor starting at her fingertips, the wild panic rising like a scream trapped behind her ribs. Lyrica stood at the edge of the platform, staring into the churning abyss below. The others watched, cold and expectant. Some whispered already, too loud, too cruel. Without thinking, Nalya moved. She slipped through the line of initiates, as if drawn by invisible threads, stepping to Lyrica's side. She could feel the terror vibrating in her friend's skin, in the way her breath came short and shallow. Nalya touched her lightly, a hand at the base of Lyrica's spine, the other brushing her wrist, steadying, binding her here. And then she leaned close, so only Lyrica could hear. "The wind can take you," Nalya whispered, her voice threading through the storm. "But it can't ever lose you." Lyrica shook her head sharply, a tear tracing the curve of her cheek. "You don't know that," she muttered. "You don't know what it's like to fall." "I do," Nalya said, her grip firm but gentle. "I've been falling my whole life. But falling doesn't mean you're lost." Lyrica gave a shuddering laugh, bitter and raw. "Easy for you to say. You're not the one everyone's watching, waiting to see if you fail." Nalya leaned closer, so their foreheads almost touched. "They're always watching, Lyrica, waiting. But you're not flying for them. You're flying for you." The wind howled around them, tugging at their tunics, keening like a living thing. Lyrica hesitated, her fingers clenching and unclenching at her sides. "What if I can't do it?" Lyrica whispered, voice breaking. "What if I jump and there's nothing there to catch me?" "Then you jump," Nalya said fiercely, though doubt gnawed at the edges of her own words. She didn't know if the fall ever truly ended, but she steeled herself, forcing strength into her voice. "Even if it's hard, even if it hurts, you keep going. You show them you're still standing." For a long, trembling moment, Lyrica stared into Nalya's eyes. Then slowly she nodded, the smallest spark of belief flickering to life. And then she leapt. Old words. Sacred words. The first lesson every child learned when they gazed at the ascendancy. Lyrica shuddered once. Then, a breath, a prayer, a leap. She jumped. The wind caught her like a living thing, fierce and sure. Lyrica's body arced upward, swallowed by the currents, soaring higher and higher until she was only a pale flicker against the bruised sky. For a moment, the storm itself seemed to pause, as if awed by her defiance. Nalya let out a long, trembling breath, and then she heard it. Her name. Called out, low and resonant, by the ascendant masters who stood at the far end of the platform. Their voices braided with power, woven into the bones of the air itself. She stepped forward. The platform blurred before her eyes. Nalya's heart battered against her ribs like a caged thing. She tasted metal at the back of her throat. She felt the first cold drops of rain, heavy with gravity, pulling harder than they should. Still, she moved. She crossed the threshold where so many had faltered, her ceremonial white snapping like broken wings around her. She stood alone at the platform's edge. The sky cracked open above her, a jagged seam of black and violet light. Somewhere deep in her mind, the vision stirred again, heavier this time, thick with meaning she couldn't yet grasp. But Nalya had made her choice. She inhaled, steady, defiant, and let the storm claim her. The sky opened beneath her. For one endless breath, Nalya hung suspended between two worlds, earth and sky, life and death. Then gravity seized her. The pull was merciless. Air screamed past her ears. The ground rushed upward, a dark blur, and panic surged through her veins like fire. Her body twisted sideways. She flailed without thinking, arms, legs, heart, fighting the invisible hands dragging her down. No. A scream built in her chest, but she swallowed it. Somewhere, buried under the terror, a memory stirred. Her mother's voice, soft as smoke, curling through the dark spaces of her mind. Let the God glow carry you. It already knows your name. The words pressed against her ribs, warmer than fear. She could almost feel her mother's hand at the small of her back, steadying her, guiding her, just as she had in childhood. Back then, Nalya had trusted without thinking. Back then, falling had been a game. Trust. She closed her eyes. She stopped fighting. At first, nothing changed. The air still howled around her. The world still spun out of reach. But then, the current shifted. Terror gripped Nalya so tightly it almost strangled the breath from her lungs. The air tore at her face, a howling thing filled with teeth, battering her ribs and flattening her against invisible walls of force. She fought the scream rising in her throat, fists clenched so hard her nails cut into her palms. Every instinct screamed at her to thrash, to claw her way back up the sky. But there was nothing to grab, no ground, no anchor. Just the endless, hungry fall. Panic clouded her mind, turning her thoughts into a tangle of jagged noise. She couldn't think. She couldn't breathe. Her chest seized in a cruel vice of fear, ribs straining with every useless gasp. This is it, she thought. I'm going to break. I'm going to die. But then, somewhere deep inside the terror, a small, stubborn ember flared. Her mother's voice surfaced again, cutting through the storm. Let the God glow carry you. It already knows your name. Nalya forced her fingers to uncurl, forced her body to loosen. She closed her eyes against the rushing void and let go. Not of life, but of fear. The change was almost imperceptible at first. A strange hum filled the space between her ribs, trembling through her bones. The frantic tearing of the wind gentled, cupping her body instead of shredding it. She felt herself slow, her limbs stretching out into a long, spiraling fall. Her body found a rhythm it had never known, a deep memory hidden in her blood, as if she had always been meant to fall this way, to fly this way. The fear didn't vanish completely. It lingered, thin and sharp, like the memory of a blade pressed to her throat. But beneath it, stronger now, steadier, was something else. Belonging. Purple threads of God glow shimmered in the corners of her vision, weaving into the very blood that sang through her veins. The God glow wasn't a force outside of her. It was part of her, old and knowing and kind. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes, torn free by the wind. I remember you, she thought. I know you. The spiral carried her downward, cradling her in invisible arms. She opened her eyes just in time to see the final stretch of ground racing up to meet her. She braced. Impact. Her feet hit first, jarring her knees. Her body folded under the force of it, and for one terrifying second she thought she would crumple, that it had all been for nothing. But no. She caught herself. Knees bent, back bowed, arms wide, alive, breathing. She straightened slowly, breath hitching in her throat. The world rushed in around her. A roar of noise, a thunder of feet pounding the ground, voices raised in cheers and disbelief. Someone screamed her name. Somewhere across the clearing, she caught a flash of colors. Banners whipping in the wind, clothes rippling like water, faces turned upward in awe. She found his face at once, without meaning to. Her father, stone still, arms folded, his mouth a thin, unforgiving line. He did not cheer. He did not clap. He did not smile. For a moment, her heart ached for it, the way it always had, from the moment she was old enough to understand that his love was a conditional thing, a thing she might never be good enough to earn. But then she felt it again. the god glow singing through her blood, the sky still lingering on her skin, the memory of flight still cradling her heart. And she understood. She didn't need his approval. Not anymore. Nalya smiled, slow and fierce. She lifted her chin against the cold bite of the wind and turned her back on him, on all of it. She walked forward, into the crowd, into the future. Her body sore and battered, but her soul soaring. The moment Nalya's feet touched the ground, the city of Port Levant came alive. A roar of cheers and clanging bells rolled up from the cliffside terraces, sweeping over the great suspension bridges and the wind-snagged towers. Music burst forth in waves, drums thundering to the heartbeat of the celebration, and the streets below filled with dancers wrapped in flowing violet sashes. Above them all, the great airships of the Le Marché Volant bobbed on their moorings, their golden sails trembling with excitement. Nalya had done it. They had all done it. The newly named had trusted the baptême du vent, had thrown themselves from the skyward promontory into the wind's fierce embrace, and had been caught, not lost. She could still feel the sky's breath against her skin. The invisible hands of gravity currents spun with purple-purpulous god glow, cradling her fall. Wind chimes sang overhead, woven from reeds and delicate threads of god glow. Their notes bent and shifted with the pull of unseen tides, the chords flashing briefly with violet-blue light as the air thickened and thinned. Everywhere the atmosphere shimmered faintly, like heat over stone, but cooler, softer, touched by the electric pulse of the god glow that kept Port Levant afloat. For a moment, Nalya just stood there, breathless. The memory of the fall was still stitched into her chest. That terrifying moment when she thought the sky might not catch her. When she had felt herself plummeting into a void too vast to survive. Fear had clamped around her throat, ancient and primal. But the god glow had answered. The gravity shifted. The fall softened, and she had lived. "You flew!" Before Nalya could even fully exhale, a familiar shout cut through the crowd, and Lyrica barreled into her. Nalya staggered back a step, laughing as her friend threw her arms around her in a fierce hug. Lyrica's usual quick-footed grace had given way to breathless excitement, her tightly coiled braids, haloing slightly around her face, still floating from the residual charge in the air. "I thought you were going to disappear into the clouds for a second." Lyrica pulled back, eyes wide and sparkling. "I thought so too," Nalya gasped between giggles, her heart still thrumming with the ghost of weightlessness. Her knees wobbled a little, but she didn't care. She was alive, and the sky itself had named her worthy. A hand clapped her shoulder, steadying her. Jarrell appeared, his grin so wide it looked like it might split his face. "Well, you didn't. And now? It's time for what really matters." He jerked his chin toward the bustling platforms of the Le Marché Volant, where tables stretched across the largest tethered barges, laden with dishes that steamed and smoked in the chill evening air. "Feast first," he declared solemnly, "dancing after, unless you think you're too lightheaded to eat." As if summoned by his words, Nalya's stomach gave a loud, embarrassing growl. She rolled her eyes and mock glared at him. "I could eat the whole sky." "Then let's start with the part that's already cooked," Lyrica teased, grabbing Nalya's hand and tugging her forward. They plunged into the crowd, weaving through lines of dancers and newly named initiates wrapped in purple sashes. Musicians perched on floating platforms sent out rippling waves of sound, flutes that sang like birds in high thermals, drums that shook the air like distant thunder. Sparks of purple god glow drifted from the braziers, curling lazily upward like living things, responding to the celebration. The sky feast sprawled across the entire market, the barges decorated with flowers whose petals glowed faintly, harvested from the cliffs beyond the city. Vendors shouted offers from their stalls, smoked river fish with peppered skins, sky-plucked grapes that floated a handspan above their platters, crisp pastry shells bursting with spiced vegetables and purple gold sauces, Nalya's head spun with the smells alone, the tang of roasted citrus, the smoky sweetness of caramelized roots, the sharp bite of ocean brine. She loaded a plate with everything she could grab. Skewers of flame-roasted meat brushed with God-glow oil, fresh cheese drizzled with honey, flatbreads still hot from the stone ovens. Beside her, Jarrell and Lyrica piled their own plates high, laughing and shoving at each other like children let loose. They found a table under a garland of lanterns, each orb burning with a gentle violet fire, and collapsed into chairs. For the newly named, Jarrell said, raising a glass of shimmer wine, its contents swirling with starlight. For the sky that caught us, Lyrica added. And for those still to come, Nalya finished, her voice unexpectedly thick. They clinked glasses, and the world became a whirl of eating and laughter. Nalya lost track of time. The feast blurred into a warm, dizzying joy, her body relaxing into the celebration as the adrenaline of the jump finally ebbed away. Somewhere the drums changed. The music grew sharper, faster. A call, a summons. Jarrell grinned wickedly. Time to dance. He didn't wait for a reply, grabbing Nalya's hand and pulling her to her feet. The crowd surged toward the open square, the newly named sweeping into the dance like a flock of birds, finding their rhythm in flight. The first dance of the named was sacred, as old as Port Levant itself. No one danced alone. Every step was a weaving of stories, a declaration that none stood apart. The god glow in the air responded to their movements, threads of violet light coiling around ankles and wrists, sparking as they spun and leapt. Nalya let herself be swept into it. She danced with Jarrell, with Lyrica, with laughing strangers who caught her hands and spun her away again. The music was endless, the ground shifting beneath them as the barges rocked gently in the evening air. At some point, breathless and dizzy, she found herself at the edge of the dance square. She tilted her head back, gazing up at the stars. For a heartbeat, the sky seemed close enough to touch. The god-glow current stirred around her, lifting the hem of her tunic, brushing her skin with invisible fingers. A shiver ran through her. Not fear, not this time, but a strange, giddy belonging. Nalya, she turned. An elder stood behind her, a woman whose hair flowed in silvered braids, whose eyes were lit from within by the god-glow's steady fire. The woman smiled and pressed something into Nalya's hand, a small token, a stone etched with the swirling sigil of the newly named. You fell, the elder said softly, and you were caught. But falling is only the first lesson. Nalya stared at the token, the edges warm against her skin. When she looked up again, the woman was already gone, swallowed by the crowd. The music rose again, higher, wilder. Around her, the sky feast blazed on, and Nalya, cradling the stone against her heart, stepped back into the dance. Tomorrow, the real journey would begin.